Let me welcome you to XReg's webinar on the proposed markets in crypto assets regulation.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Folks often want to understand what the legal process is before this applies to them. So let's look very carefully at where we are now on the left-hand side of this timeline. We're expecting MiCA to be published any time now. Last Friday, the Commission alerted folks that this might take place today. That then will follow. This proposal rather, is sent to the European Parliament and to the European Council. The European Council is essentially, for these purposes, made up of the governments of each of the member states, but not the EEA countries. And each of those other institutions will deliberate, debate, investigate, consider, take representations from stakeholders, and then decide on what it is prepared to live with and what it is not prepared to live with, what it wants to see changed, and what can stay intact. These deliberations can take, frankly, any period of time, but certainly we're talking about months and sometimes longer. These deliberations, so far as Parliament are concerned, to a certain extent take place in public. There's likely to be some sort of hearing on this proposal. There will be some aspects of the considerations of those deliberations that will take place in public and some behind closed doors. When each of the other institutions, the Parliament and the Council, are satisfied with their, if you like, their positions, there then follows a period of what are known as trilogues, when the three institutions get into a room behind closed doors and decide on a text, a final text, upon which they can all agree. You see here a faint image of the of smoke rising from the Vatican when a new pope is chosen, and I guess this is a very apt image in the sense that a point will arise at the end of that process of trilogues when the final text will be approved. It will then be translated into the languages of the different, or the official languages of the European Union, and those final texts will be published in the official journal. This is the official publication of the European Union. 20 days after that, MiCA comes into force. And strikingly here, it will be immediately then applicable to e-money tokens. I can imagine a raft of issues that might arise in view of the fact there's no process in place between publication in the official journal, which is effectively the starting point, the starting gun for it becoming law, and 20 days later. But no doubt these will be issues that will be taken up during the period of deliberations. And then follows a period of 18 months. At the end of those 18 months, all the remaining provisions, whether they apply to national competent authorities who will have to operationalize their arrangements in order to be able to process applications, authorize CASPs, for example, deal with white papers, and so on and so forth. And also for everyone in industry. Anyone who is an issuer, anyone who is a CASP, anyone seeking to offer or place or have admitted into a market in the EU will, on that day at the end of 18 months, be subject to the new regulation. Realistically, well, this point from publication of the draft of the proposal through to publication in the official journal, well, it could be 12 to 14 months. To be honest, for a piece of legislation of this size and scope, it would take a major stretch of imagination to think that that could be done in 12 months. 24 months or somewhere between is certainly more likely, but if, for example, in the trilogues, there are difficulties in agreeing texts, it could run on well beyond that. Certainly we saw in a much simpler piece of legislation, which was 5AMLD, the Fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which was probably the last piece of European legislation that directly affected crypto. What was fairly straightforward turned out not to be, not because of the crypto provisions, but matters to do with ultimate beneficial ownership and countries not being able to agree on something that they can all live with. And so that particular piece of legislation took a very long period of time to reach the point where final text was approved. Clearly, what this briefing is designed to do is to start folks thinking about MiCA. It's clear to me it's going to have a profound impact on everything to do with crypto, on pretty much most projects that already exist, on projects being dreamt up, on tokens that are already being traded, and new tokens that are being thought about. It's going to obviously have a major impact on folks like Libra, who've been trying to negotiate with lawmakers, policymakers, and regulators for some considerable time now, trying to find a point, some point that they could live with. And clearly there's a raft of MiCA that's targeted at those type of stable coins. Clearly the intention is that Libra would be considered a significant stablecoin. But if you've got something which is deemed a financial instrument, something which is already defined as a financial instrument, say under MiFID, then it's still going to be a financial instrument under MiFID, and you probably don't have to think too much further about MiCA. But if you're offering a crypto asset or providing a crypto asset service in the EU or the EEA, you need to consider MiCA, and you need to start thinking about how it will affect you immediately. Clearly, MiCA sets some pigeonholes, some boxes. There are unlikely to be any grey areas. The grey area of crypto has now been painted very much, well, I was going to say black and white, but in fact, it's probably all pretty black. And you need to think about your activity being undertaken by a legal entity. Essentially, MiCA requires someone, some people, somebody to be accountable. This is what happens in the traditional financial world, and this is what is now expected, seemingly, in the crypto world. With that in mind, the idea of decentralized finance or DeFi and permissionless blockchain is probably not something that's going to work within the EU or the EEA. And there are also wider implications, because this is not just, I think, about the European Union. The European Union is a major trading bloc. It influences an awful lot of global thinking. And there's been a lot of talk for many years now about global coordination, some cooperation between trading blocs to try and come up with a universal approach to crypto. But many nations, as we all know, have waited, bided their time, perhaps sat on the fence. Clearly now they've got a model that they can copy, that they can emulate. And I expect many other nations now to emulate MiCA in whole or in part. So I'm going to finish with a very slightly modified slide that I also showed at the V20 a year ago. And that is that crypto is now part of the global financial system. There is no getting away from it unless you want to block out the EU from your thinking in crypto. Then crypto in the EU is defining what crypto is likely to be across the world. And therefore, it's now very much something that is going to become part of the global financial system. So here are some thoughts. What do you need to think about? Well, right now, you need to start thinking about your strategy. If you're working on a DeFi or permissionless blockchain project, well, it's time for a rethink how you're going to approach it. And you've got to make a decision. Certainly in the medium term, you've got to be thinking about whether or not you want to do what you do in the EEA or outside it. And you've also got to consider whether you're likely, if you're, say, a service provider or if you're an issuer, whether or not you're going to solicit investors or customers within the EEA, because then you're going to be brought into MiCA. You're either completely outside it, cut off the EU, or you're going to have to think about MiCA. And if you're not already in the form of some legal structure, some legal entity, then you're going to have to think about establishing one. And for certain types of tokens, as you've heard through this presentation, and certain types of activities, such as any that fall under being a CASP, you have to think about that legal entity being established in the EU. And so if you're affected by any of what we've talked about today, of course, we're here for you to talk to us. And with that, I'll hand back to Ernest. I think for a change for me, more or less, bang on time. Thank you.
Thank you. We will be issuing a detailed paper over the next week or so on MiCA. If you'd like to get a pre-release of this document or any other future publications or invites to webinars that we may issue, please feel free to subscribe on via the URL which is on the slide.